so the book starts off with looking at the magic of landscape, of the land. And when I was a young man, I had the great opportunity, when I was very young, when I was 11, my father knew the old Chief Druid, who ran a tutors in London and became a friend of the family. And so I first met the old Chief Druid when I was 11, and then I got to know him better when I was 15, 16, and started to train with him when I was 17 through 18. So. And what he did for me was to awaken me to the magic of the landscape that we live in, that we're privileged to live in. These white chalk figures that we have, the dolmens, the stone circles, the holy wells, the old tracks. And my grandfather had been a member of the old Straight Track Club and a friend of Alfred Watkins, who developed the concept of ley-lines. And so that was sort of in the family too. So this idea of the sacred landscape fired my imagination. And of course, at the time that I was a young person too, it fired the imagination in a way of a whole generation. Because John Michel published his A View Over Atlantis in 1969 or 68, which portrayed ley lines as power lines. He connected it with the idea of feng shui from the East and suggested something that Alfred Watkins hadn't, which is that these lines actually conveyed some sort of magical power or force. And so the whole sort of generation of young people became turned on to this idea of the magical sacred landscape they were living in. And then what happened out of that early magic that took place in this island, on this island, you gradually had the stone circle building, which was in many ways taking the idea of the cave and developing it. So in the dolmens, you were creating an artificial cave where people would go into in the burial chambers, and then they would come out of it to be reborn. And there's evidence and suggestion that it was not only for the burial of people, but also for initiation ceremonies. And then the stone circles worked with the power of darkness and light through the sky and the stars. Then we moved into the time of the Druids, and so chapter 2 opens with the Druids. We explore the world of the Druids when all this kind of understanding was starting to form, as it were, and we call that the magicians organise themselves, because you start to have a more sort of formal structure of the Roman writers talk about. And then, of course, as we know, the Anglo-Saxons came with these tremendous movements of population, and you have the realm of Anglo-Saxon magic. And one of the second startling sort of idea I think that the book is based on is one, the treasure house of magical learning, and two, the fact that people are practicing all these kinds of magic today. If you go and visit West Kennet Longbarrow or somewhere like that, you will sadly find remains of little tea lights or flowers placed. It's not sad that the flowers are there, it's sad that they can't remove their tea lights. It's because people are actually using these places for magic today, and for ceremonies today, for spiritual practice. And so the other thing we realised is that there are people practicing this kind of magic. So there are Druids, of course. There are people working with the energies of the earth and the land, and ley lines and parasites and so on. And there are Anglo-Saxon shamans today. And the most well-known one is the Professor of Psychology at Brighton University. So we had the idea to interview current-day practitioners so that we would talk about the history of magic through the ages, but we'd also interview current practitioners and interleave them through the book so that the reader could see, A, the history of this kind of magic, but B, the fact that actually people are doing it today, which is really quite remarkable. And so we interviewed Brian Bates, for instance, a chap who wrote The Way of Weird, which was a book in the 80s that he wrote about Anglo-Saxon shamanism. And the interesting thing about the Anglo-Saxon period is you started to get a lot more stuff written down. So you got spells, magical formulae, etc. And it was at the time when Christianity was starting to permeate these islands. But rather than it being a sort of discrete break between the pagan past and a Christian future, of course it was layered and mixed up, as so many things are in this world. And so if you read the old Anglo-Saxon spell books, you'll find all sorts of Christian elements combined with pagan elements. And for 500 years, half a millennium, we used runes here, and a particular kind of runes, the Anglo-Saxon Futhorc. And we used this sort of magical language here. And so we talk about that in the book. And as we were creating this book was extremely difficult to write. And partly because it was two people writing it, and so we had our different viewpoints, which were actually helped to make it what it was. But also because we were dealing with this huge amount of material. And we had this idea of interleaving history with current practice. And then we had the idea of also introducing experiences, tasting these things. Because it's all very well reading about Anglo-Saxon magic or Druid magic or whatever. But there's always that question, well, yes, I know, but what do they really do? I mean, and what do they do now? I mean, really do that, you know. And you can explain it to me 1,000 times, but until I've actually tried it, I won't know. I can talk about the taste of beer or whatever, but until you've drunk one, you won't really know what it's like. And so we developed the idea of introducing experiences, mindful of the fact that magic, I believe magic works. Some people believe it doesn't, but I believe it works, and we both believe it works, and therefore we were mindful of our responsibilities in that regard. So we created sections called traps for the sorcerer's apprentice, just to point out little traps that you can fall into. Everything worthwhile has its risks, and magic has its risks too. And one doesn't have to be sort of grandiose about that. I mean, the risks, say we're exploring ley lines, is that you get totally obsessed by them and you're constantly plotting ley lines. The risk with dowsing is you get obsessed with dowsing. And I've seen people in restaurants dowsing whether they should go out in the afternoon or stay at home or go to the movies. You can get trapped in stuff. So we did that. So we created these experiences as well, and so there's an exploration of the runes as well. And so you go through, and at the risk, I won't go into the whole book because you'll go nuts. But we look at the world of the alchemists, the world of the Victorian magicians, the ceremonial magicians, until we carry right the way through to the 21st century. And what happens with the story of magic is, as time moves on, more information is available to you because it's closer historically. And so you have more material to work with, to digest and to understand. And you have a process of the present building on the past. So as each era of magic unfolds, it's building on the past. It's getting richer, and you also have more information and material available. But as you get into the present day, and you look back and you survey